Many in Ecuador are still waiting for answers after the deadliest prison riots in the country's history. There was shock and despair. Mothers lost sons, women lost partners, and children lost fathers in a series of massacres that has shaken the small South American nation. The worst bloodletting began in the morning of Tuesday, September the 28th, at the Literal Penitentiary in the country's largest city, Guayaquil. The scale and sheer brutality of the violence, which left 119 dead and dozens injured, is unprecedented in Ecuador, despite growing crime and homicide rates. The police say inmates from rival gangs fought with machetes, guns, and even chainsaws and explosives. Security forces battled for days to retake control of the jail, the country's largest. They found scenes like a battlefield, with bodies piled high in the courtyards or stashed in air ducts or bathrooms. Many had been mutilated or burned. I'm inside the Literal Penitentiary, and behind me you can see where the coloured walls are, the wings of the prison where the worst violence took place in this bloodbath. It's taken almost a week for the armed forces to retake control of this prison. Behind these walls, 8,500 prisoners live in a compound built for 5,000, with, in some cases, only one unarmed prison guard for every 700 prisoners. The 12 wings of the prison were, in effect, controlled by at least 7 criminal kingpins. The violence began in one wing and spread to others, says Bolívar Garzón, who became head of the prison service on the eve of the worst massacre.
A consecuencia del conflicto que existe en los grupos de delincuencia organizada, por el control del poder interno dentro de los pabellones, se enfrentan y atacan al pabellón 5, inicialmente los pabellones 8 y 9 y finalmente los pabellones 3 y 6. Una verdadera matanza, masacre que no tiene justificación alguna. Nosotros estamos luchando contra eso, tenemos planificación, estamos poniendo adelante y el gobierno está apoyando en todas nuestras actividades, pero esto se sale de las manos, lamentablemente.
As police and prison guards took control of the overcrowded jail, they seized an arsenal of weapons stashed on the grounds. In one of several seizures, 13 guns, including automatic rifles and handguns, more than 1,000 bullets of different caliber, and 250 bladed weapons and 5 grenades were found. Garzón stepped down from his post after yet more violence killed 62 prisoners in the same jail in November.
De acuerdo a los informes de inteligencia, entendemos que sí, que estas organizaciones, estos grupos de delincuencia organizada tienen el apoyo del narcotráfico internacional. Las agencias de inteligencia han determinado que eso es verdad. Por supuesto, nosotros acudiremos a todos quienes nos puedan brindar su ayuda. Una ayuda internacional, por supuesto, es bienvenida, pero nosotros al momento estamos tratando de primero parar la violencia de estos días para luego retomar el control total de la penitenciaría.
Ecuador, sandwiched between Peru and Colombia, the world's 2 biggest producers of cocaine, has become a smuggling superhighway. In the fight to control trafficking routes, Mexican cartels have imported their own conflict and their own bloody methods, says Guayaquil-based security expert Jorge Villasesis.
Cuando esto no se veía en Ecuador, se comenzó con los trabajos de inteligencia de la Policía Nacional y se descubrió que habían ya bandas internacionales enquistadas. 2 carteles mexicanos, como usted lo mencionó, Sinaloa y Jalisco Nueva Generación, que se unieron a las bandas comúnmente delincuenciales del Ecuador para que ellos les asistan y le den seguridad a la carga que es la droga.
More than 300 inmates have been killed in prisons this year in Ecuador. That's a little more than the entire number killed between 2011 and 2020. The deadliest prison riot was the 3rd, but 22 prisoners were slaughtered in the same prison in July and 79 inmates in coordinated clashes between prison gangs in February. Then in November, 62 inmates were slaughtered despite a 2-month state of emergency. President Guillermo Lasso announced changes to the military top brass, appointing a new head of the armed forces and a new intelligence services chief.
El Ecuador se encuentra bajo una grave amenaza externa por el ataque de las mafias del narcotráfico, las mismas que pretenden tomar control de los centros de privación de libertad en el país y quitarnos la tranquilidad en las calles y ciudades.
Ecuador's government has blamed the escalation in violence on disputes between drugs gangs looking to control trafficking routes. President Lasso said allies including the United States and Colombia would help Ecuador in the fight against drug trafficking. He added that soldiers will take part in security controls inside as well as outside of the prisons, as despite emergency measures, the armed forces had not been allowed inside the jails. Outside the prison walls, murders have risen too. Ecuador is below the average for the region, but violent deaths grew from 6.7 per 100,000 in 2019 to 7.7 in 2020, the highest in recent years.
Y el impacto en la sociedad ecuatoriana es terrible. El Ecuador tiene miedo. Guayaquil y todas las ciudades del Ecuador como tal tenemos miedo. Tenemos miedo de salir a las calles porque todos los días vemos nosotros cómo la delincuencia ha crecido y la policía no tiene los recursos suficientes porque no ha sido efectiva para combatirla, porque lo estamos viendo. El Estado como tal no ha sido efectivo para poder tener un sistema carcelario.
Ecuador's new government was meeting the challenge head-on, says Pablo Arsemena, the governor of Guayas province, where Guayaquil is located.
En este gobierno del encuentro, que tiene 4 meses, se está plantando cara y se está dando solución a esos problemas, que no son problemas de ahora, son problemas acumulados de mucho tiempo. Y por eso este gobierno ha destinado 75 millones de dólares para ser invertidos en fortalecimiento del sistema carcelario. Es una cantidad histórica, nunca antes se ha destinado esa cantidad para poder fortalecer las cárceles.
Outside the prison, families worried desperately about inmates still inside and resorted to street-side lawyers to try to get them out amid a government pledge to pardon some prisoners. Hundreds of families lost a jailed loved one, but Maria Elena Villasis lost 3 in the massacre in September. Her brothers Davy, Darwin and Johnny were brutally murdered in the cell they shared in Wing 5, where the barbarity began.
Y mis hermanos estaban injustamente ahí porque, o sea, si tú caes preso y no tienes plata, nunca sales. Te quedas ahí, porque con la plata todo el mundo baila.
In her home on the outskirts of Guayaquil, she grieves the trio who were all aged under 30. Her only consolation is that another brother in the same prison, Daniel, survived. He was in Wing 11.
Mis hermanos cuando estaban ahí adentro nunca se metieron con nadie. Ya, nunca se metieron con nadie, nunca tuvieron problemas ni peleas ni nada. Durante los 2 años que tuvieron ahí, nunca. Ellos cantaban ahí adentro. Cuando había una reunión así de Navidad, fin de año, ellos cantaban.
Villasis says they were serving sentences of between 2.5 and 4 years for illegal drug and weapon possession. They would have had a parole review just days after they were savagely killed.
Por eso le digo, yo
In
tengo
the following days, she received their remains. They had been shot and stabbed. One brother had been beheaded. She buried them together a few days after the massacre. Between them, they leave 8 orphans, all aged 7 and under. It's increasingly clear that highly dangerous inmates were mixed with low-level criminals, many of whom had been put away for drug use or possession. But the latest massacre and the growth in violence and insecurity is impacting Ecuador on the global stage, says political analyst Andrea Endara.
Tiene un impacto muy alto. Por ejemplo, uno de los objetivos del gobierno es reactivar el turismo y por medio del turismo generar ingresos, pero nadie va a querer venir al Ecuador sabiendo que su seguridad está en peligro. Canadá ya advirtió que Ecuador es un país de alta peligrosidad y nos recomienda a sus ciudadanos venir. El consulado estadounidense ya dijo que en ciertas partes de Guayaquil no deberían ir sus ciudadanos porque corren peligro.
Le cantó a la...
But for grieving Maria Elena Villasis, those concerns are irrelevant. She worries that her remaining brother could be caught up in the spiraling gang war inside the jail just as he is due to be released. Meanwhile, surrounded by children, she watches a musical tribute to her lost brothers on her camera phone, still scarcely able to comprehend the loss.